So welcome everybody. My name is Marichelle Vaught, and this is a Community of Vermont Elders event, also known as COVE. Aw, I'm glad you love dogs. I appreciate that. And so I appreciate you all for being here. And before we begin, I just wanted to give you all a little bit of background about who we are. So COVE, we are a nonprofit organization that's been around since the beginning of the 80s. And really our work is focused on creating a world without ageism. We want people to embrace aging and to age safely and know what to do and to expect as we age. And we do this through connecting, educating, and empowering. And we connect folks through programs such as this. So even though we can't be together in person, which typically we would be together in person, we can take advantage of the technical world, forget about COVID for a little bit and bring some enriching programming to you, such as storytelling or poetry or this, like a virtual exhibit. We also educate through our programs where we talk about protecting yourself against scams, fraud, and financial exploitation, and Medicare fraud, abuse, and errors. We also empower by encouraging people by being a voice to lawmakers on issues that affect them through our Grow Bold group. And these are just some of the things that COVE does. And you can always learn more about what we're up to at our website, which is vermontelders.org. We always want to bring you the important information you need, but also we want to keep you connected to your community and your peers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to our special guest of today's COVE call, and his name is Josh Blouin. And Josh is somebody that I knew as a middle schooler. And I said I wouldn't embarrass him by calling him Joshy, because that was something I remember everybody used to call him when he was younger. But you know, it was wonderful to see him. I bumped into him a couple of years ago and learned that he was getting into photography. And I've been following his work over the past couple of years, and it's beautiful, beautiful work. So it's wonderful to see just how much that work is growing and how beautiful it's become. So anyway, Josh's desire to pursue a career where he would be in the woods studying animals led him to the University of Vermont, where he graduated in 2015 with a degree in wildlife biology. Josh spent the past several years working on various wildlife projects: Kodiak brown bear resource monitoring and habitat management in Alaska, wolves in Yellowstone, wolverine and lynx in Montana, bats in Yosemite, black bear in Minnesota, and now moose in Vermont, where he was born and raised. Josh is currently working on his master's degree at UVM, studying the habitats moose rely on and how habitat selection relates to health. He has fallen in love with documenting the natural world through the medium of photography. Says Josh, it is these wild landscapes that capture both my imagination and my heart. So with that, I am very excited to introduce you all to Josh Blouin. And also, because he's going to be sharing the screen, what we've noticed is that with broadband and technology, it seems to stream better if you keep your camera off. So there may be less lag if you keep your video off. So I'm going to keep my video off. Josh is going to keep his video off as well. And also muting if you can. So that'll help with any skipping of images and anything like that. If you want to say anything, feel free to use the chat window. We'll be monitoring the chat window. And then Josh he says this is going to be very casual, so feel free to, if he asks any questions, feel free to chime in at any point. But you're welcome to chime in using the chat window as well. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So Josh, go ahead and feel free to share your
Okay.
screen and I'll go ahead and stop my video and mute myself.
Well, thank you so much for the nice introduction. And anybody feel free to call me Joshy. That's fine as well. Okay, let's see here. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Well,
Okay.
there's a notes. We see the notes on the side.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me try to, whoops. Bear with me here for 1 second. Technology, right? Let's see. Screen 2. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and there's nothing interfering.
Nope.
Okay, so I guess we're all set to start then. So my name is Josh Blouin, and today I would just like to take some time to relax and enjoy some photographs of our beautiful state of Vermont. So as Marichelle said in the beginning, I have traveled extensively out west doing wildlife work, and when I was asked to give this talk today, I kind of bounced around different ideas of what I wanted to really focus on and how I wanted to present my work. And I've given some talks strictly about wildlife and nature, but today I decided to kind of focus on Vermont and our beautiful state here. So before we begin, I just want to give some background on myself, a little more in depth, and how I got into photography as an art form. So I was born and raised here in Vermont, and as I put on this introductory slide, my roots run very deep here. I'm a seventh generation Vermonter, born in Berlin, and I've always been enthralled, and maybe this is a product of being born and raised here in Vermont, but I've always been enthralled by nature and by wildlife. And so I decided to, after high school, attend UVM to study wildlife biology. And so while studying at UVM and some time after my undergraduate degree, I worked all over out west, studying and researching different wildlife species. But one of my earliest jobs was, I'm sorry? Oh. One of my earliest jobs was studying bats and bears in Yosemite National Park. And this is when I really decided to purchase my first camera. And the purpose of buying a camera was to really document my experiences in Yosemite Park with my friends and family. I was living in the northern part of Yosemite, high elevation, at just under 10,000 feet, and had seen some of Ansel Adams and some really inspiring work, and thought, you know, I'd never really taken photographs, but figured I'd bring it along and try to document. I still just had a flip phone, and so I figured that was the best move to show friends and family. And when I began sharing my photographs from Yosemite of the landscape and wildlife to friends and family, they loved the content and seeing where I was. But much to my surprise, many were commenting on the composition of my photographs. And this was kind of surprising to me, as I have had no training in or prior experience with a camera. And so it took me a while to really grasp the idea that my photographs were captivating something differently than other people taking photographs, perhaps. Because to me, it was just, I was looking at something and trying to capture that to the best of my ability. So it was at this point in time, I began to really realize how much I enjoyed sharing my experiences through the medium of photography. And when I came back home to Vermont about 4 years ago to study the moose here, I was excited to try and use this new medium to capture the beauty of my home state of Vermont. And so I think a lot of people who are born and raised here, not everybody, but has a love for Vermont. I feel a strong connection to Vermont. And I've found over my years of traveling out west, when I run into other Vermonters, they tend to have that same kind of pride in our state. And so I felt that always, but perhaps leaving and coming back allowed me a different perspective on what I may have taken for granted as a kid growing up here, such as 150-year-old general stores, farms that have been in families for 200 years, beautiful, quaint villages, etc. Let me see. Hold on. There we go. So as a photographer, as an artist, when I came back to Vermont, I really wanted to capture what Vermont feels like to me. So what sights or sounds or smells or touch can I tap into to successfully capture moments that make Vermont special to me? So in today's presentation, I thought I would step through the seasons of Vermont and share some photographs that I have taken that I feel express my feelings throughout a year in our state. So I envision this presentation being a very laid back event. So please speak up either in the chat box or unmute yourself. If you have any connection to a place that I've photographed or a place that I'm sharing, or any comments or questions you may have about the image or what about the picture. And I think this could be a really relaxing time, a very informal time to just really enjoy some photography and discuss our beautiful state here that we're lucky to be in during these times. So let's start with summer in Vermont. When we think of summer months, what comes to mind for you? What do you picture? What do you hear? What do you smell? For me, it's humid, warm breezes, refreshing lakes, lush green mountains, the sound of crickets or cicadas, white puffy clouds. So this first image to me speaks to the beauty of Vermont in the summertime. And this is at Lake Willoughby in Westmore, which I'm sure many of you have traveled to or spent time at. And I find Lake Willoughby to be a photographer's dream to some degree. I mean, you get these really dramatic, sheer rock faces that have been carved by glaciers thousands of years ago. And it's really beautiful any time of year. But in the summertime with a lush green landscape and the white puffy clouds, it really spoke to me as a summer scene and captured some of that emotion that I think of when I think of summer in Vermont. So I'll just go through some of the slides here for each season and kind of give some commentary about each photograph. But again, feel free to comment on any place or photo or memory. I would love to hear that, and I certainly want that to be part of that presentation. So this next image here is I woke up, which I often do, very, very early in the morning on a summer day, and was decided to go out to Peachum in very, very early morning hours before the sun was coming up. And I captured this photo of a cow just kind of standing in the morning fog. And this to me captures a lot of feeling and smells that I have as a child in Vermont. The sounds of cows in the warm, thick fog in the distance, the smell of a farm kind of wafting through the air. And these smells and sounds remind me of home. And so when I go to these places and try to compose a photograph, it's how can I transport somebody else who maybe isn't in Vermont at the time, but has spent time here and can relate to those feelings. And to me, this image, it portrays that early morning summer humidity and warmth and beauty of an early summer morning.
Josh?
Yes.
So a couple questions are popping or a couple comments are popping up in the chat box. So the first one was in reference to the first photograph. Emily Laxner said, I like how the blue of the sky gets a little green in the water.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then Ruby asks, I like how you are focusing on conveying senses other than sight, which is true because with the cow, the photo of the cow, like I could actually, I don't know, I could sense that feeling of the morning, that morning mist. And Mara's asking, was this shot in black and white?
It was, yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
I photographed this in black and white, but I photographed it in color as well. And it's sometimes can be as a photographer, picking and choosing between what is, what is the best way to express a feeling, and oftentimes you have to choose whether it's black and white or color. And so yeah, I played around a little with both of those, but sometimes I feel like portraying certain feelings in Vermont can be more expressed through black and white imagery as well.
Do you shoot with digital or film?
Digital. Yep.
Digital. Okay. And also the first question wasn't from Emily. It was from her son Liam. So I apologize, Liam.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, and yeah, feel free to just jump in with any question. I love the questions and love the discussion around the images. So this is also in Peachum, not far from where I took that last photo. And again, I find myself often going to Peachum or the surrounding areas in Peachum because I feel a strong connection to the landscape and how it portrays Vermont. I feel like there are a lot of scenes in Peachum that can really show certain aspects of the state as a whole. And so I tend to spend a fair amount of time in this location. So this is again Peachum. It's a warm summer day. You get those different sounds of birds and crickets, breeze, but also the angle of the sun. And so the summertime I find is a very different time to photograph in terms of the lighting, which of course is much of what makes a photo in my mind is lighting. And so these early mornings or late evenings in the summer, they to me have this kind of lemon feel to them to some degree. Um, Let me just make sure. Sorry to pause for a second. I just want to make sure sometimes I have my computer on like night mode, so it can distort color a little bit. Um, so let me just check that real quick. Sorry
Well,
about
what was
that.
interesting with the black and white cows is that maybe it was the image itself and how people are seeing it, but some people were thinking that it was in color or
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
that it was sepia toned.
it may be I have my computer in night mode, which also might affect the
Oh.
color there. So anyway, I'll continue here. So this one here is Nichols Ledge in Woodbury, sorry. And if anybody's been here, I'd love to hear how you feel about this. But this was, I'd seen pictures online of Nichols Ledge, and I decided to go again very, very early in the morning. I got there well before sunrise and kind of waited for the sun to come up over the mountain. But to me, again, it's about the feelings more than just the visual, right? So I wanted to capture that very calm summer mornings. I can imagine sitting down by Nichols Pond here and seeing this glass and watching the fog burn away with the warm sun, and have the feeling of either wanting to jump in or jump in a canoe or just sit by the water and enjoy a cup of coffee as the sun burns away the fog and opens up the warm summer day. So this next photo is in the Medowee Valley. So this is in Rupert, Vermont. And this is a place that I haven't traveled to a ton, but is somewhere that I passed through and was kind of awestruck by the countryside down there, and the really beautiful open farm fields and scattered family farms that are still exist in that area. So to me, again, this is really showing the beauty of Vermont summer to me, the really lush green mountains and these summer kind of storm clouds, with the corn in the foreground, and the small building, which amazingly is in the middle of all the corn, which I thought was pretty cool.
That's beautiful. Ruby is asking, do you do any macro photography?
I don't really mess with macro too often. Macro is, it's a different form of photography, and I occasionally mess around with that, but I primarily shoot landscape or wildlife. Um, you'll see I include some wildlife stuff at the very end, and I definitely have some micro shots that I've taken, but primarily primarily landscape stuff.
And Mara is asking, is this or any of the shots colorized at all? Do you do color corrections?
No color corrections. So I shoot in RAW, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but when you are shooting in digital RAW, it essentially means, when you shoot in JPEG format is actually compressing files. And so you can't get, when you shoot in JPEG, you're getting a correction by your camera, more or less, to try to estimate what the color actually looked like when you took the photograph. And so the beauty of shooting in RAW is you can bring those images into your software where you store all your photographs and go through your images, and then add saturation into your image to mimic what the image was when you took it. And so that's the beautiful thing, is it's an uncompressed file, is RAW. And so I see Ruby's question here of, how do you get that kind of saturation? And one of the answers is, I mean, you do have to add in saturation when you're shooting in RAW, but the reality is my camera also is shooting a really high quality megapixel image. And so I invested in a nice camera setup that is able to capture detail and color on the landscape when shot in RAW format. Okay. So this next image is a lily pad that I photographed on West Hill Pond in Cabot, and this was after a fresh rain, and my family rents a camp on West Hill Pond in Cabot, and so every morning I'll go out and go in the kayak. There are no motorboats allowed on the small body water, and go float around and see what I can see for wildlife or images, and was able to capture this lily pad with all these water drops on it, which I thought was really a stunning scene to me. And I guess I don't think you consider this micro, or macro rather, but it's definitely a close up, which is different than some of my other photographs. But so this is also in Cabot. This is kind of a zoomed out look of West Hill Pond in Cabot, and this is actually a small island that is part of the camp. I apologize. It looks like there's some blue little triangles here from the PowerPoint presentation, but so this is, again, when we get back to the idea of, as a photographer, what am I trying to capture? And a lot of times it's for yourself, right? I mean, it's something that, as an artist, as a musician, as a painter, as an artist, you're trying to portray your own feelings, I guess, to some degree, and hopefully it connects with other people, and maybe it will, and maybe it won't. But when I took this image, I'm trying to capture the feeling of calmness on a summer morning, and maybe sitting there and taking in the sun on your face, and really just enjoying enjoying the moment there by a lake, which I'm sure if others have grown up in Vermont, we have so many beautiful lakes and ponds in this state that we can enjoy and have that experience.
What kind of lens did you use for the lily pad is a question.
Oh, I have three primary lenses I use. One is my kind of go-to, which is a fixed 35 millimeter lens. And the other is a 70 to 300 millimeter lens. So that's what I use primarily for wildlife. But also more intimate landscape scenes. And then my last lens that I use a lot for landscapes, but some for macro is a 10 to 20 millimeter lens. And that's all on my Nikon camera. So I believe with the lily pad photo, I took that with my 35 millimeter. I was in a kayak, so I was able to just kind of lean over within close proximity to the lily pad without having to zoom in. So.
Yeah, Liam said those diamonds could state how supremely beautiful this pond is.
Yeah, exactly. Blue diamonds. Yeah, it's one of those places that I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time at on family vacations, and it's just you almost have to pinch yourself at the beauty of this
Beautiful.
place, and there are no other camps really on the pond, and it's just I don't know if others have been to this pond, but it's really a spectacularly beautiful spot. But with that being said, there are lots of ponds and lakes that are similar to this across Vermont. So even if it's not this pond, hopefully this photograph may spark a memory of other ponds or other places that you may have spent time at. So I included this photo here to again portray the feelings or the sights that we may see in Vermont. And of course, if you've lived here, you've traveled around the state. There are several different cuts that occur for haying here in the state, and farmers take pride in that. And they go out and sometimes it's a very relaxed, fun process, and other times it's an extremely stressful procedure. And my parents, they have sheep, and getting hay from the farmer, it can be as quick as you get a text or you get a call and it's an immediate response because there's rain on the forecast and you have to get out there and work quickly. And so I captured this image. This is in Randolph. I was driving along and just kind of looked out across the landscape, and on the hillside there was a farmer, and he was haying, and something struck me about the lines of the hay that had been created, and just kind of this, I don't know, artistic spin to this process that we are so used to seeing here in Vermont. This is a pond. This is over by the Museum of Everyday Life. I don't know if any of you have traveled by that. I forget the name of the actual pond, right over in Glover. Mm-hmm. And my dad actually has a camp right around the corner from this on Shadow Lake in Glover. But this is one of those summer days where I could not believe the water and how much like glass it was. You drive by and there was a slight ripple on the far left and far right, but overall the water was legitimately like glass or like a mirror, which really allows you as a photographer to capture these amazing reflections. And I see in the comments there, Parker. This is actually not Parker. This is right on Route 16 rather. But I do love Parker pie pizza. But that's a different topic of discussion. This photo here, I actually was asked by the bank in Northfield Savings Bank in Montpelier to take some photographs and fill up their space down there, and also in Barrie and in Waterbury, and one of the folks at Montpelier office really wanted a photograph of the state capitol with the flowers in front of it. And so it was a bluebird day and in the morning, and I decided to go down and see if I could try to capture something. And I called this photo, I titled it "Bee Over the State Capitol," it just was one of those situations where I was fortunate to capture the feeling, I guess, of fresh flowers in front of the state capitol and the beauty of our Capitol building, but also got lucky, I guess, and that is a part of photography, right? Is getting lucky and having something like this little bee that I didn't necessarily expect to be in the photograph to be in there. So it kind of created this cool added touch to the photograph. And finally, to wrap up summer in Vermont, I don't think I could end without showing a campfire photograph. Kind of a staple for me as a kid growing up and spending a lot of time on lakes and ponds was having that ability to sit by a campfire at night, and it's just as warm at night as it is during the day, and it's great fun to sit around by a campfire and have s'mores, but you got to fight the mosquitoes, which at West Hill Pond in Cabot can be particularly bad. So we all know that feeling. You gotta go to find the smoke actually in the fire. That's the only protection from the mosquitoes, it seems like. So with that, I'll move into fall. And fall for me is probably my favorite season in Vermont for obvious reasons. I love the changing landscape. I love the change of seasons visually, but also the smells. As a kid in Vermont, spending time outside 24/7, the smell of leaves, decaying leaves, is such a distinct smell. And it's something that I tried to capture in this photograph more than just maybe the beautiful visual of the color and the tunnel of kind of color moving up this road. And this was taken in Bloomfield, Vermont, up in the Northeast Kingdom, where I lived the past 4 years. And it was more than just trying to capture that color kind of in the background, but in the foreground, trying to capture that feeling of walking through and kicking leaves on the ground and what that smells like as you walk through a road like this. So trying to, portray that, I guess, as a photographer and try to get people to maybe feel that way without actually being there, or maybe even without ever experiencing it. And I don't know if that's possible, but maybe transporting people to a different place. So the next photo here, this was taken in Albany, Vermont. And it was one of those days where I'm driving along in the state, and the peak foliage was absolutely peak. And it was one of those situations where you almost can't even believe the color in front of your eyes. And as a photographer, you want to try to capture that. But again, I think as some conversations have come up in earlier on here is capture it in a realistic way. And to some, they may look at this photograph and go, wow, those photos couldn't have been that color. They don't pop that much, but the reality is they do. And to some degree on this particular day, a camera may not even do it justice. And there are a lot of times when I'm out photographing and that is the reality is the beauty or what we see in front of us, the colors, the view, it just cannot be captured through a camera. And I try my best to capture that in a realistic way, but there are times where it's just hard to do. I felt like in this particular photograph, to me, I was able to capture some of the beauty that you see in Vermont landscapes as you drive along in rural Vermont and what that may look like.
I don't know if you're glancing over at the chat, but there are a bunch of comments where people are saying that you're really capturing smells and sounds with these fall photographs.
Whoops. Yeah, and I think that's a which I've mentioned a couple times.
Leaves,
yeah, and I think that's something that is a challenge, I guess, as an artist is trying to maybe have something that's more than just visually appealing. And I don't know if you want to call that composition or what you want to call that, but it's something that is it evokes more than just, oh, that's pretty. And I think it's perfectly fine to take photographs that are strictly just beautiful, they're pretty. But I often strive to take something that maybe there's more to it. There's more hidden feelings or hidden emotions that may come up. And it's funny because sometimes I take photographs and to me they're not my personal favorites. I may like them, I think they're beautiful, but then somebody sees them and to them they have to have it and they want to purchase it from it and they want to hang it in their house and I can't say, oh, I wouldn't choose that if I were you. I have more beautiful photographs that you should buy, because it's individual and whatever it was to that person, it sparks a memory or something. And I think that's the beauty of art in general is able to, we all can kind of approach it from different standpoints as human beings and can either love it or hate it or somewhere in between. So hopefully that got at your question of capturing different feelings, I guess. Was there another question there?
Do you adjust the WB to help grab those colors?
WB.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
I'm not a photographer.
Yeah, WB. I'm actually not quite sure what that is either.
That white
balance.
White balance. Yeah, I don't know a ton about that. I don't do a ton with white balance that I know of. I do use Lightroom as my program for going through my photographs and storing my photographs in a library catalog setting. And occasionally you're adjusting for contrast and things of that nature, which again, if you're shooting in RAW, you almost have to some degree. But okay, so this photograph, again, similar to the others, which I'll probably continue to harp on throughout this presentation, is trying to capture some of the feelings that I feel in the fall. And as a kid in the fall in Vermont, apples and going to apple orchards and picking apples was a big part of my childhood. And so to me, this was in Peachum, right near Green Bay Loop Road. And to me, there was something as I was driving by, I drove right by and then stopped and backed up, which I often do when taking photographs is, I see something out of the corner of my eye and I may see it and it catches my eye for some reason. And sometimes I'll kind of mull over what that is that I'm catching. And I'll decide 5 minutes further down the road that I have to turn around and go back and try to capture it, because you can always delete photographs. But oftentimes that is how I photograph the state, is I drive around and I see something and I stop and I back up and, try not to make other drivers too angry on the road. But sometimes it consists of having to stop in the middle of the road and get out and quickly snap a photo to capture something that is intriguing to me. And there was something intriguing about this. It's an old farmhouse in Peachum, and there's kind of this old piece of farm equipment, and to me, it kind of speaks to a different time period in our state. Although it doesn't as well, it speaks to the past. It speaks to culture and history here in Vermont, but it also is still active today. So that's kind of a cool thing about a lot of Vermont, is some of the pictures, they're present and they're current, but they also could be from 100 years ago. So this is one of those photographs that was just one of those really lucky days. I woke up and drove to Peachum very, very, very early in the morning, and was able to capture serious dense valley fog in Peachum. And so to me, fog really allows for this different emotional experience with a photograph. You're really able to kind of, I don't know, there's a little mystique, a little mystery just adds something to a photograph for me. And so this was, again, one of those days when I see that in the potential forecast, I always try to get out and drive around and see if I can capture things that are emotional to some degree. And for me, this fog in Peachum was enhanced. The Peachum scenery was enhanced because of that. This is one of those, again, very, very early morning. This was as the sun was rising. This is right outside of Montpelier. Again, one of those situations where you think to yourself, this is almost too real, too unrealistic, I guess, in its composition and in its image in terms of visuals. But over the years, you get foliage and you get certain situations and lighting and fog reflecting off of that. I mean, sunlight reflecting off of fog, and it can play with sunlight to create or enhance certain colors and how they're reflected. And when it's peak foliage, you can get some spectacular visuals that, if you did see them and hadn't experienced it for yourself in real time, you may think to yourself, this is fake. And I often feel that way in Vermont. There are times I'm driving and I capture a photo and it's a beautiful image. And I think to myself, someone's going to see this who lives in Los Angeles and is going to think this is fake, which I think we're fortunate to live in a place that can be potentially fairyland or fake, or something that only exists in movies. So this is a small church from very, very early on in Vermont. This is in Bethel, and again, this is an image I was driving by and I just had to pull over and try to capture this, because to me it spoke to Vermont, but also to New England as a whole, and its history and its deep roots here in New England. And when I traveled out west, as I mentioned, I love the beauty of the West and I love the dramatic mountains and the wildlife, but there was something that was always missing for me. And for that, a lot of it was the history of people in the landscape. And so when I came back, again, some of this I may have taken for granted as a kid, but when you drive around Vermont into these small villages and drive through these really quaint little spots, it feels like you're stepping back. I mean, this photograph could have been taken in the mid 1800s. And so to me, that is a really cool thing as a photographer, is being able to capture that and kind of transport people back to potentially a different time period. So this photo is a little different maybe than some of my others that I've shown so far. This is in Smuggler's Notch. I was going through the notch early this past fall and decided to climb up on one of the side, sheer rock faces and try to capture, I guess for me, the feeling I was having at Smuggler's Notch, which was a little dark, a little gloomy, a little spooky, I guess you could say. There was something there that was historic, but kind of a shady kind of past history. And for me, it was, how do I capture that in a photograph? And so I climbed up the top of the little rock face and was able to capture this image, which I felt spoke to those emotions I was feeling. Which if you haven't been through Smuggler's Notch, I highly suggest it. It's an amazingly beautiful place, but also a really unique, interesting piece of history here in our state.
I don't think it's worthwhile doing it now.
This photo here is of Tinker Farm over in Fletcher, Vermont. And if you haven't been to this area of Vermont, I highly recommend it. It's an area where I drive to if I'm really looking, seeking for inspiration for Vermont landscape shots with our beautiful Green Mountains in the background. I photographed this barn many times. it's kind of the ideal, the ideal Vermont landscape photo in my mind. And so when I was trying to capture this during peak foliage, it was, or maybe just past peak, but a lot of trees still had color. I was trying to get to a place where I could capture it and frame it how I wanted to. And for me, that was climbing partially up a tree and trying to frame it in such a way that I could capture that beauty, while including some of the color of the leaves in the foreground. So that was my attempt at capturing that in the fall.
There's a question about, oh, that's beautiful. There's a question about framing shots. Do you have tips for framing shots?
It's again, it's one of those questions that it's a difficult one to answer on my end to some degree, because as I mentioned in the beginning, I've never been trained. I've never had taken classes. I've never been taught how to use a camera. It's all something that I bought a camera to photograph my experiences in the West, primarily doing wildlife work. And when I came back, it was trying to capture emotions that I felt strongly about here in Vermont. And so I guess a good strategy, and I'm happy to talk with, I don't want to take up too much time, but a good strategy for framing images, I guess, is to work without a camera. And I guess that speaks a little bit to what I was saying earlier, when you're driving along and all of a sudden a picture, literally almost like a snap in my mind, happens when I see something. I think, oh, that would make a good photo. And it's almost as if my eye sees a rectangle and imagines a shot. And so I don't know, I think it would be a good practice to go out without a camera and try to just kind of imagine scenes or shots and how those would play out when you actually had a camera in your hand. But again, I strongly think that there are some things you can teach and some things you can't. And in the arts, I think there are certain things that are, I don't know, I don't call it genetic. I have no idea what it is. But there's something that when I picked up a camera and started photographing, was fortunate enough to be able to capture what I was feeling. And I'm finding not everyone has that. And I don't know, I'm sure there are ways to enhance it or make it better. And I'm always working to try to do that. But yeah, I feel fortunate in the sense that, I have an eye for trying to take photographs and successfully trying to capture them. So, and I don't know what that is. So if anybody has any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. But
Is
so
this
this,
Mossglen Falls?
yes, yeah, this is Mossglen Falls in Stowe.
Favorite spot.
And so I do see that question there. And so this photo was taken and I used, I brought my shutter speed way down. And so I was able to, but I brought it down to a point where I was able to still capture the movement of water, which, when the lighting and the conditions are right, I think it's a beautiful thing to do is try to slow the speed of your shot way down. And so you're able to capture movement. But also not bring it down so much that you're not capturing the light in the foreground. And so, and of course you have to use a tripod when your shutter speed is way down. And so, because you'll get blur in the foreground or in other parts of the image if you're standing holding a camera. So yeah, I was able to successfully capture the movement of the waterfall without sacrificing the light in the foreground on the kind of yellow gold leaves that had fallen at that point. So I guess again, another capital photo. This was this past fall and was driving by. Actually, it was pouring rain most of the morning, and sometimes when those conditions, you can drive by and the light during those days, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, when it's raining or gloomy, sometimes that makes colors pop even more. And so I happened to be driving by the Capitol building at this point, and those little maples out front were just kind of popping in that gloomy rain. And to end our fall season here, this was taken over in Cambridge, and to me, this was capturing those cold, late fall days when you wake up in the morning and most all of the leaves have fallen off, and there's this stark beauty, and it's one of my favorite times of year, is that November time period where you're transitioning from the fall into the winter, and you get these strong frosts on the ground, which is what you see here, and really cold mornings. And there's just, to me, there's something so beautiful about that stark landscape here in Vermont during that time period. And I guess I would be, it would be unfortunate if for me, if I didn't mention for the fall, growing up here in central Vermont, the Tunbridge Fair for me was a tradition. I think it was one of the hardest things for me this past fall was not being able to go to the fair. There's something about Tunbridge and about the fair that kind of hits me at my core, and I don't know what it is. And some people, they say, "Oh yeah, I love the fair too. You can go and get junk food and it's fun." And I guess I can't express to them enough that that there's more to Tunbridge to me than that. And I can't necessarily put my finger on it, but I feel a very, very strong connection to this tradition and to the fair and to what it represents. And I love going there and talking to old farmers and capturing moments that could be taken at the beginning of the fair in the mid 1800s. Like that boy in the top left corner, who actually his family owns Kingdom Creamery in Hardwick. But he has a team of oxen that he was showing. And it's just, to me, when I captured that photo of him and his oxen, it was, that photo could have been taken in the 1800s. And so, it's a beautiful fair and it's a beautiful place. And to me, it represents the beginning of fall. It always kind of kicks it off for me in mid-September. So with that, we'll move into winter. And winter for me is probably my second favorite season behind fall. I love photographing the winter time. Today even I'm happy to be here presenting with you, but these past few days, it's a photographer's dream, for me anyway, to be out there and trying to capture the grays and the blacks and the whites. And there's just the stark landscape and the contrast in black and white, especially, to me is really provoking. And so anyway, this is the wood stove that I grew up with. This is in the house I grew up with. And it's primarily what we heated the house with. It's an old Beckwith, early 1900s, and it looks like a Wimbledon trophy. And to a lot of Vermonters and a lot of people who grow up in a colder climate, this is your source of heat. And I wanted to try to capture that feeling of warmth and beauty that comes with having this source of heat. That I think is really important to a lot of Vermonters. And, for me growing up with this was a big part of summer and fall, and, was preparing for winter. And that's a big part of being a Vermonter, I think. But days like last night and tonight, and, to be near a wood stove like this there's something really, really magical and warm about that. So trying to capture that in a photograph here. This was taken at Smuggler's Notch. So that photo that I took previously, where you can imagine me being kind of on the side of that, not on the rock face on the left there, but somewhere up in the road that snakes between those mountains. I had climbed up to the left there to get that previous photo, but this was again one of those situations where the fog was just right. It was kind of settled down into the notch, but with all the snow, in the foreground, covering those conifers, and to me, there's something so beautiful about those conifers with their pointed tips, and it just feels like the north and feels like winter, and you can just feel the cold there. So fortunate to be driving through the notch and capture that moment. This was taken in Facein, and it's kind of a spin, I guess, on some of those more traditional ones you'll see down near Woodstock, primarily at the, not at the Jenny farm, but at the other one there in Woodstock, Sleepy Hollow, which is the idea of this quaint little house and farm kind of in rural Vermont. And I guess my intention here was to capture the snowy feeling and their driveway, with this old historic barn, as this is where they keep their animals still today. And there's something just so beautiful about that. And that this one in particular, to my knowledge anyway, some of these photographs and these places are pretty well known on social media, especially. And this was one that I feel is not. And it's one of those places where I feel like it's showcasing that there are a lot of these scenes in Vermont. And I think if you take a drive and you take the opportunity to drive around all the dirt roads and back roads of Vermont, these scenes exist everywhere. And it's just, I guess, stopping to pull over and enjoy them when you can. So are there any questions that I've missed, I guess, on the chat? Because I've been kind of
Well,
pushing
there's one
through.
that just came up.
Okay.
It seems like a lot of these photos are lucky moments. What percentage of lucky, unlucky moments days do you have? Or are there days when you feel frustrated or discouraged? Combined,
Oh, for sure.
of course.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a combination of both. There are days where, even weeks, where I'll go out and have an idea of capturing something fantastic, and have high hopes, and you go out and it just doesn't happen. And that can happen to, I think, any art form, or you can sometimes get in a lull, which definitely happens, and sometimes you have to seek inspiration in different ways. But with that being said, when I go out to photograph, a lot of times it's random, and I don't have a plan necessarily. I have an idea of kind of what I'm looking for. But majority of the times, the photos that I capture that I love are completely unplanned. And they are a cause of being lost to some degree, which is when I'm trying to photograph Vermont landscapes and find beautiful places. A lot of times that is the strategy, is how can I get lost and be in a place where I'm not familiar and I don't know where I am necessarily. And I think sometimes that is what creates visually appealing things, is when they're spontaneous and they're, your creative juices just kind of are sparked because of something you see, whereas you try to go out and plan a photograph, and sometimes you can just not really capture it, I guess, because you're trying too hard to capture it. And so I feel like as a photographer, I'm often trying to just kind of go with the flow and capture things as I see them when I'm out there. And I will say I've traveled all over Vermont a lot. And I guess I would say it's an easy thing to, I mean, it's not an easy thing to get lost for me. I typically take a dirt road and pop out somewhere that I recognize. Anyway, I'll keep moving here.
Yeah, before you go on,
Oh yeah.
we have reached the 3 o'clock hour, and
Yep.
of course, you're welcome to go on, and we are recording this. I do know that some people do have to go, but we are recording this. So if anybody does have to leave for any other meetings or whatever, please look for the recording if you have to miss the rest of the presentation. But yes, we do want to see more photographs.
Okay, well, I'll try to move through them a little quicker here.
Oh no, we are all enjoying this. And I know
Well,
that
I appreciate that.
there are
but-
more questions too, so please continue.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, this was taken, this is again, I guess, one of those more traditional views that's been photographed a lot in Vermont. But it's one of those scenes that I think is photographed a lot for good reason. It's in Cambridge and it's Pleasant Valley. And this is an area that this view of Mansfield to me is just so dramatic and so beautiful and different than other views of Mansfield that we're maybe used to. And so trying to capture the kind of sheer face of Mansfield from this angle, and the beautiful foreground of Vermont countryside and farms. And I got fortunate again to be, I planned it to some degree the night before, knowing that there may be snow on the trees, and so got there and was really pleasantly surprised to see the entire mountain was covered in white, which to me really it enhances the overall image here. And this is, I guess, speaking, earlier about some of the different light in the summertime, you get that kind of lemon light, I always find. In the winter, it's kind of the opposite. You get these really blue winter. I don't know how to describe it. The sky is just the light, the angle of the sun is just very different. And so this was taken over in Randolph, and just to me captured the beauty of winter skies at dusk. So. This is one of my parents' sheep, and I think it's may hit home to Vermonters who have had livestock or had sheep in particular. It's something that is a beautiful thing to be able to go out to the barn and see animals and try to capture them and how they are enjoying Vermont's cold, snowy days. So this is of Charlotte, one of the sheep here at my parents' place. This is again Peachum. This is one of those places that I frequent. You saw the other one earlier with the fog. This was a January day. It was freezing cold. I think it was -10 degrees. And I went out knowing that the moon was going to rise, and drove an hour, 45 minutes to Peachum, and tried to get there for the time the moon was going to come up. And so got there just in time and kind of slowly watched the moon rise over the mountains. And you can see the smoke kind of beyond the barn there coming up from a house. And I just feel I was trying to capture that emotion and feeling of the moonrise. And a lot of times when you take photos at dusk like that or moonlight, you do get this blue tinge, I find. And this image, there's very little enhancing of that happened. It's just kind of how my mirror on my camera captured the light at that time of day, that time of early night, I guess. But I feel like it captured the cold of January for me. This is one I threw in of our dog, Border Collie Sam, plowing through snow. And, we get conditions like this out there, and it's a beautiful time to be out with animals and enjoying the snow. This is Tinker Farm again, from a different season. So that one with the leaves you saw earlier, this was trying to capture the beauty of Tinker Farm, the surrounding of Tinker Farm, but especially that red color of the barn against the kind of blue-white landscape on that particular day. So hopefully was able to capture the beauty of Tinker Farm during the winter time. And, this is just kind of an example of that stark contrast during winter that I love so much, the black and white old farm field, wooden fences, a photo that could have barbed wire, a photo that could have been taken 100 years ago on a farm. Again, another kind of maybe famous farm. I'm not sure. It's Bragg Hill Farm in Fayston. And one of those images that, to me, if you saw this and didn't live in Vermont, you would definitely want to come and visit. It just, to me, is such a beautiful contrast of our working landscape, our beautiful farm country, but our skiing and our mountains in the background. And of course, moonlight in Vermont during the wintertime. I try to get out occasionally with my camera at night, try to capture night photographs, which, similar to taking waterfall pictures, you do have to have very low shutter speed and a tripod. And so try to get out and capture some of that beauty in that way. Just with the moonlight reflecting off the snow, it's almost like daylight. So you're able to really, really experience that. And so we'll get into our final season here. And I know I'm running past time, so I'll move through it. But this is, spring's a special time. We go through this harsh, cold, kind of gloomy winter, and now it's time for everything to come back to life. And so you get the trees starting to bud and the sunshine and mud season. So this photograph here is kind of early spring in Tunbridge, on a hillside there, and in the beginnings of mud season, which, growing up on a dirt road, that was a big part of existence here, is trying to move through this season. It can be rather difficult, given mud and the how deep that mud can get. We actually had to have a special vehicle growing up to even get out of our house and drive down the road. So it's a very real thing here in Vermont. So tried to capture that here in Tunbridge. Red-winged blackbirds, that's something that, if you grow up here, when you start to hear the red-winged blackbird, it's a signal of spring for sure. The times are changing and things are moving along. And so that's one of the things I love about Vermont, is the kind of these really defined seasons. And this is one of those things that really defines spring for me, is the blackbirds coming back. And again, when we're talking more than just sights and smell, is the smells. And for me, spring, there's this earthy, mud, dirt, growth kind of smell that hopefully I was able to capture here, which is, there's so much to take in as the season is changing from stark winter to summertime, and that transition in the spring it brings a lot of new sights, but also smells and feelings. So hopefully that captured some of that. And again here, this is late spring, early summer, where different insects and different bugs start to come out, and we start to see changes on our landscape that we didn't see in the previous 6 or 7 months. So trying to capture that feeling, I guess, when you drive by and start to see old familiar sights. This is actually a kind of a series of very, very small waterfalls, but to me it kind of felt like it was small and a close-up photo, but it also could be one of those photographs you zoom out and see from above in like the rainforest, in Brazil or something, which I think speaks to Vermont's water and the amount of water we get sometimes in that early period, and the lush landscape we have here. This was taken over in Calais. Again, an image that's trying to just capture the feelings of spring, the growth and the smells that come from the forest floor. I spend a lot of time in the woods for my work primarily, and so trying to capture some of that feeling here. And of course, we can't have spring in Vermont without, once we do have green up, is that spring snowfall, which we often get hit with when you just think, oh, winter's over, and then you get about a foot of snow, and it's wet and heavy, and you lose power. And so this is one of those days where you get dumped on, but it's spectacularly beautiful. And with that, you get that green up in the foreground, but you can also get these really beautiful winter scenes that kind of clash with your springtime feelings. And so I start to try to go out and capture some of that contrast between the seasons, or the clashing of the seasons, I guess you could say. This was in Cambridge again, kind of with the big Mansfield view here. And of course, as Vermonters, spring is a very special time, and some people still, when you drive around the state, use the old traditional sap buckets, and it's a ton of work. And I've worked on several farms and helped people do that, and I think it's a really rewarding process and something that is very rooted here in our state. So try to pay some honor to that with this image here. And so that kind of wraps up the photos for Vermont seasons. And I guess I just want to very quickly go through some of the wildlife photos that I've taken over the years, which I guess I'll say, feel free to check out, I have a website, which is just my name, joshblouinphotography.com, where you can see a lot of my wildlife stuff or my landscape stuff from both Vermont, but also all over the West. And so, I'll just quickly pass through. This was taken up in Kodiak, Alaska, when I was working up there, of a fox that came right up to my camera. A brown bear that I had a close interaction with, which of course, we working in Kodiak, we saw brown bears all the time. Really special kind of scenes with two cubs dancing and enjoying themselves and playing in the stream close by. When you work and study brown bears up there, you can't work on the landscape without being close to brown bears. There are over 3,000 brown bears in Kodiak, and so you walk around to that island, and we worked in very, very remote places in Kodiak, and you inevitably have close encounters with those bears, and some really special moments. Some mountain goats in Kodiak. Again, this is some black and white that I felt like it was an appropriate time to use black and white. I was able to kind of capture something differently, I think, without color. A Canada lynx in Northwest Montana that I was able to kind of enjoy about a 10-minute experience with. I was studying them out in Montana and was fortunate enough to run across one. Actually, there were three in this situation, but was able to capture a photo of one, just kind of looking at me in a curious way, which I think, these animals in some of these really wild places, they haven't seen humans too often. And so, which is a great thing. So hopefully able to capture that kind of curiosity with this animal who was checking me out. This was in Yellowstone. It was about -30 out, and these bison, a mother and her calf, were walking through a blizzard, and there was something striking about it to me that really spoke more to more than just the beauty of the animals, but to their life and to their existence and how they live in a rather difficult climate. This was a snowy owl that I took actually just not that long ago, just a couple weeks ago in Shelburne, and was really fortunate enough to stand in a place for several hours and was able to watch this snowy owl successfully hunt for mice and catch them. And it just was a really magical moment with wildlife. This was a photo that actually got selected by a Nat Geo editor during a competition. And this is a bee carrying a ton of pollen on its back, which was, I sat for 2 hours at least trying to capture this image where there were bees flying around and just worked really hard to try to capture that pollen on the back of the bee. And with that, I'll finish there. This is a picture of a moose that, that I was tracking up in the Northeast Kingdom, which I've been doing the past few years. And so I, of course, have to include a moose photo in my slides. So I'll end there, but thank you all so much for joining. And hopefully that was a little over an hour of time that you could kind of forget about some things that are happening in the world and just kind of enjoy some photographs. So hopefully you enjoyed, and I guess I'll take any questions or comments at this point, but thanks again for joining.
Well, that was amazing. And I am so proud of you, Joshy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Wow, it was just so beautiful. And I know there were so many questions, and there's so many comments too. So many people saying wonderful images. Thank you for sharing. What a treat. I mean, you can see all of these comments. People are saying so fun to see so many places they know and recognize.
Oh, great.
And also, so wonderful to see these places from, no pun intended, through a different lens, so to speak. And also, to see them, you know, we're sitting now in this cold winter, but to see it and to be hopeful, you know, to see these places in the summertime and to feel hopeful about, oh gosh, can't wait to go to Willoughby, Lake Willoughby, and to experience that again. And, you know, to be
Yeah, and I
excited.
think that's a really good point is, you know, we to remember even during, you know, these challenging times that we do live in a really special place. And we live in a place where we can still go out and take a drive, and you don't have to interact with people, but you can see some really beautiful, really beautiful things. And just, yeah, feel fortunate to live in Vermont, and feel fortunate to see pieces of history that are still scattered around our state, and really appreciate that. Because I know when I go out and photograph, that's what I always come away with. Even if I don't capture a good photo, it's that we live in a really spectacular place. So
Yeah, and it makes us appreciate what we have.
for sure.
You
Yeah.
know, again, feel free to look at the comments. I am recording this, and I can send you a copy of all the comments and the questions as well.
Great.
Let
Well,
me
I'm glad everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, and they do.
Yeah,
The
so
photos
good.
really do capture smells and senses, you know, not just the visuals, but the smells and the sounds.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and because we live here, you know, we've experienced most of these, and so they really do invoke a lot of these senses for us.
For
Um,
sure.
so
Yeah.
that's just wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Josh? Again, Josh's website is joshblouinphotography.com, and it's a beautiful website, and there's so many other prints you can look at on there, and you can purchase prints on there as well. And I'll tell you what, Josh, I would love to have you come back on, because the wildlife photography, I'd love for you to show more of that as well.
Yeah, yeah, and as I mentioned kind of in the beginning, I was torn, because I have given, you know, I've done a couple galleries, and I've given talks on strictly wildlife stuff.
Yeah. Well,
And you know,
yeah.
I absolutely love that, and would love to maybe do one on here as well, because
Yeah.
you know, I definitely have hundreds of wildlife photos that are very, very different than Vermont landscape
Yeah,
photos.
that would be great. And we'd love to see the photos and hear about your stories behind those photos, and the studies, that, you know, anything that you've learned, you know, throughout the years,
For sure. Yeah.
you know, taking those photos, because those were just amazing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's one of the pros, I guess, of my line of work is, you know, when you're studying wildlife and researching wildlife is, you know, oftentimes that includes field work and hiking around in the woods and following animals. And so having a camera on hand is just, it's almost just a natural thing, or a, you know, something that's kind of meant to be paired. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm fortunate to be in situations a lot of times where it is a photogenic scene, I guess, with wildlife. So
Well, thank you so much. And if anybody has any other questions for Josh, you can all email me as well, and I can forward them to Josh. And you all should have my email since you registered through Zoom for this event. And then we've got some events coming up in 2 weeks. We have Robin Eichen from the Federal Trade Commission, who's going to talk about some COVID-related scams, dealing with healthcare and identity theft. And then after that, we have M.E. Sims, who is the author of A Little Bit of Pleasure, who talks about embracing sexuality as we age. So please join us again for future COVE calls. Again, thank you so much, Josh. We'll
of
be in
course.
touch.
Yes,
And
thank
thank
you.
you everybody for joining us today, and have a great week, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.